Well, there is no place more dangerous in the garden, you will agree with me, than Australia down under. So we have this morning with us a blast from the past. We spoke quite a while back to our gardener in Australia and thought, let's bring him back on and talk about dangers in the gardening. And then, of course, composting, two really important topics when we talk about gardening. If you'd like to contact us, remember you can WhatsApp us on 060 904 1056. And of course, if you wanted to phone in and join the conversation, you can join us on 0861 914914. So, without further ado, we get stuck right into it over here on Green Thumbs Up. You know how it goes. This beautiful gardening day, let's talk to all the way from Australia, Daryl Phipson. You can join us on Facebook Live. You can join us on YouTube and join in the conversation. So, good morning, Daryl. Mr. Daryl, how are you?
Hello, Rabia, and it's great to be back on the show again.
Yeah, it's great to have you on here. So, we are talking today about dangers in the garden. What dangers lurk in the garden? Before we do, let's find out from you, what is it like? What's the weather like in Australia? Because we've
Well,
got some beautiful rain.
contrary to the weather that you're having today, it is beautiful and sunny, and there is not a whisper of air anywhere. So it
Oh,
is
wow.
really a great day to get out in the garden. And when I was in the garden today, you could hear the buzzing of the whippersnippers and the lawnmowers all over the neighborhood. So
Whippersnipper. What is a whippersnipper?
I don't know what they call them in South Africa. It's a petrol-powered machine apparatus, basically, that has some nylon cord at the bottom, and it spins. What do you call them?
Oh, it's an edge trimmer or a hedge trimmer. Okay, a whippersnipper. There we go, folks. To the dear listeners at home, there you have a new word, a whippersnipper. Now, if you're out with your whippersnippers today, I love that name. Let's watch out for the rain, because rain and electricity, isn't that a danger that we could encounter in the garden, Daryl?
Yes, it is. And what I have actually noticed on occasions is people have electric lawnmowers. I think in South Africa, Flymo is one that's very popular. And
Mhm.
when it rains, they tend to very often get the cords wet or the plug wet, which can give you electrical shock and kill you. As also, I've also known people that have basically gone over and cut their own cord. So
Oh,
those that you do need to be aware of. If you have a safety switch, though, that should trip in and save you, but there are dangers, yes.
could be a shocking experience.
Not one that we would like.
Brother Asfat Fili here is our sound engineer today. He's having a good giggle. Assalamu alaikum, brother. How are you? Hello. Alhamdulillah, it's on the other side of the studio. So you can't quite hear us. Daryl, I'm just going to take a question from a listener, Fatima Asmal, who says, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear sister. My grandson has allergies, especially to mosquito bites. Please share your home remedies. Now, this is a little bit off topic, but if you'll give me a second, Daryl, I want to prioritize just this one question. Mosquitoes are everywhere at the moment, especially in South Africa. I don't know what it's like there in Australia, but mozzies are just the bane of our lives. So lemon verbena is a good one to plant around the house and on windowsills to stop the mozzies getting in. But once you got mozzies in, sister, and you're wanting to help him, a good thing is yarrow tea. So you make yourself a cup of yarrow tea. That's a teaspoon of dry yarrow to a cup of boiling water. Let it steep for 5 minutes, and you can use that as a wash. Just a little tip, and I'm not Greek, but I know the Greeks do everything to do with Vicks. Vicks works on mosquito bites, anything that has those eucalyptus and menthol vibes. So there's the answer to that question. And we're going back to dangers in the gardening. Right. So electrical cords, we said, was a bad thing. Now, what do you find dangerous in the garden?
Well, Australia is a very hot country,
Yes.
probably one of the driest and hottest continents I think that we have, and dehydration can be a very big danger that people are not aware of.
Of
So
course, we don't think about it.
I would say that I'd probably put that close to the top of my list. And most of the dangers that I'm going to speak to you about today are actually dangers or things that have happened to me whilst being in the garden. And
Really? Please share. Please share.
so I did actually once suffer from dehydration and heat stroke, and that was just because I went out in the garden and it was a hot day, and I just didn't take enough liquids. And yeah, it can really affect you
Now,
because
some of the symptoms of dehydration is you could feel very lightheaded, you could feel dizzy, you could feel nauseous, you could actually pass out.
absolutely, yes, yes.
Onto the lawnmower, hopefully not. Okay, so right. So those are one of the dangers is the heat stroke. For the listeners at home, when you're out gardening and it's really, really hot in the day, here's a quick recipe for a hydration fluid. And for you, Daryl, keep that salt and bicarbonate of soda nearby. You just take a pinch of the salt, a pinch of the bicarbonate of soda, put that into your glass of water, and there you have a very quick, very easy to make rehydration fluid. If you don't like the flavor, add a little bit of lemon juice and honey. So hydration is one of the things. Let's talk about some more. What else could be some of the dangers?
Well, I think a danger that everybody thinks about, and it's something that I've come across, is snakes,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
in the early
Good.
spring. The snakes have been hibernating, and they basically are under rocks in places where we don't know or we don't see them, and we come into the garden and we basically start pulling out weeds, etc., and they are a danger. I have on a few occasions had close encounters with snakes, and I don't like snakes at all. So it's something that you need to be careful of. What I found, and actually when I was in South America in the Amazon and I was on a tour, the tour guide that was taking us through the jungle, every minute or so, he would actually stop and he would hit the ground with a big stick, and he would send a vibration through the ground. And he said that by doing that, basically it makes the snakes aware, because obviously, well, snakes, they cannot hear, but they feel vibration, and it makes them
Okay.
aware you are around. So it's something that is good practice.
That is a good practice. I know that they are often more afraid of us than we are of them. And so, making a noise does tend to scare away the snakes. And as you say, the vibration particularly. Here we have spiders as well. And I know in Durban we have these great big spiders, the golden orb web spiders, and they are massive. They actually eventually eat up birds. So what could we do about spiders? Any tips for spiders?
Well, we have lots of spiders here, but I haven't really come across any in the garden.
Okay.
And if they are in the garden, I wouldn't know if they would be poisonous or not.
Okay.
Generally, pretty safe there. However, something that's in the same on the same subject that is really dangerous, or can be really uncomfortable, are ticks. And I've been bitten
Mm.
on numerous occasions. They basically pick up the heat source and they cling on to you. And some ticks carry bacteria, and they can cause your body to swell. They can cause you a lot of pain, and you can be hospitalized.
That can lead to Lyme disease. Ticks are flourishing everywhere. I know myself in the yard at the moment, we have a problem with the ticks, and the dogs are medicated, the cat is medicated, and we still have them. But, ticks are such an important part of the ecosystem. And we don't know that, a lot of listeners may not know out there that ticks are actually kind of a food source for birds, and that's how they get some protein. Asfat is shaking his head here. Yeah, ticks. They're not fun. And if you do get bitten by a tick, dear listener, please be sure to not just kind of flick it away or try to pull at the thing. You really need to get a tweezer, and you need to get as close to the skin as possible so that you remove the tick, because what it does is it buries its head into your skin. And if you leave a part of the tick in, then that is going to create infection, and it's potentially very, very dangerous. So make sure that you're removing them properly. Don't pour things on them. I've had people say, pour some petrol on the skin. I'm like, why would you pour petrol on the skin to dislodge a tick? Just common sense sometimes isn't as common as we think. But let's get those ticks removed, head and all. Now, speaking of some of the other dangers that we have for the garden is, folks, watch out with the kitties in the garden, and be sure to identify the plants that are growing, because some of these plants can be quite poisonous, and bushes and trees. Daryl, have you come across any on your neck of the woods?
Yes, a lot of dangerous plants in Australia. A plant that is actually very toxic that a lot of people don't know about is the frangipani.
Really?
Yes, apparently just a few drops of its milk can actually be lethal.
Now you've taught me something. I did not know that the frangipani was dangerous. All I know, the frangipani has the most beautiful fragrance. You know, it's this little white flower, sometimes with a yellow inside, and it reminds me of those teacup rides. You know, that you go on in the fairs. You get these teacup rides. It's such a beautiful open flower. The fragrance is absolutely fascinating. In South Africa, particularly in Durban, for the folks out there, if you have the Ceylon tea rose, is its common name. There's a bush that grows everywhere, and it's got these little pink flowers, sometimes pink and orange flowers, sometimes kind of dusty pink flowers. Have a look, because they are dangerous. They are dangerous because, yeah, they will cause skin irritation, and if the kitties eat them, then it's even worse. Little bushes with berries. Watch out what those berries are, because kitties will put everything in their mouths, and those little berries can be very, very dangerous for them. We're going to take one little question here that's come in, which is a little sideways from our interview once again. That is from Sister Farida. She says, Salaam alaikum wa alaikum salam. My indoor orchid plant has rebloomed after a year. Wow, that's awesome. The fascinating part is that it rebloomed on the same stem, and I had not cut the stem back. It was attached to the spiral wire. The other orchids I have for more than 2 years have not rebloomed after I cut the stems when the flowers fell off. So this is an interesting topic. I don't know if you do orchids at all, Daryl, but some people will say leave the stem on because it will go back to green and you will have it flower. Some people will say cut it back. The reason I personally cut it back, and our Orchid Society recommends that we cut it back, is to give it a second bloom. So when your orchid has bloomed and you cut it back, make sure you don't cut it all the way down. Count 2-3 notches from the bottom. You'll see those little notches, and cut it above that last notch, so counting from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, and then snip, so that you have a second stem that shoots out of that to give you flowers. So you can get your orchids to bloom once, twice, thrice in that year. And she sent us a lovely photo, and this is from Farida Ahmed. So there we go. Going back to our dangers in the gardening. Now, I know you have the most incredible beasts and creatures and things in Australia to be afraid of. And you mentioned earlier, what did you call it? The weed eater? Whippersnapper. What was it? A what? Sorry, I didn't hear you. A whippersnipper.
Correct.
Okay, so you have a whippersnapper. We have whip spiders. And when I first saw them, I thought that they were very, very dangerous. And if you're in Durban at all and you haven't seen them, or you've seen them and you think they're dangerous, they're actually not. And the weirdest thing is there are people out there who keep whip spiders as a pet, a complete sideline to this conversation. But they look like big, giant, flat spiders, like a cross between a spider and a scorpion, actually. And they have these very, very long threads that come out of their front appendages, and they literally whip the things into their mouths, like mozzies and things like that. So those are them. We have another question that has come in over here. My sister, Top Gardening Show, how to graft. Okay, we're going to have to do a show especially for you. And this is from brother Abdul Khalik Mula. We'll have to do a show especially for you just on grafting. That's what we will do. Now, if you're talking about dangers in the garden, Daryl, there are safety measures, obviously, that we can take, surely. How do we keep ourselves safe, apart from stopping cords from lying around?
Well, I think the most important thing is the protective equipment that you wear. And what I mean is Always wear a hat, because obviously the sun can burn, and the sun does burn, especially here in Australia. It is really strong here. I always garden, even in summer, on a hot day. I always garden with long pants and with a shirt, and that obviously again protects me from the sun, but it also protects you from bushes. If there are any nasties out there, something that wants to take a bite of you, it can take a bite at the shirt rather than your arm. So I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, yeah. Especially with tick season, talking about covering up, tick season, wear those galoshes, wear those gum boots before you get out there. So if you have all sorts of bugs in the ground and creatures that could bite you, they're going to bite the boot and not bite your foot.
Gloves are something that is also very important. I am never in the garden without gloves.
Now, I'm very naughty that way because I love to feel the earth on my skin. So you will always find me when I am gardening with blackened nails because I get in there with my hands. I also believe it's so good for our immune system. But from a safety perspective, it's not the best. There may be bits of glass in the ground. There may be things that can poke you, things that can bite you, things that can actually get into your skin and cause infections. So yes, definitely wear your gloves. So it's basic common sense, isn't it, though, in the garden? Common sense.
Yes, I think it all boils down to primarily common sense, and that's aware of. And another part of common sense is trip hazards, and I've seen people hurt themselves by their implements just because they've been in the garden, they're using a spade or they're using a rake, they put it down, they don't remember where they put it, they take a step backwards, they walk on it, and they stumble and fall over.
We've seen. Yes, please go on.
Yeah, and I was going to say it can be very painful. You can hurt yourself, and also when people use rakes, especially the metal rakes, to always put them with the sparks facing down, because again, I've seen people stand on those, and those sparks go right through their feet.
Ouch, 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 ouch. If you've had anything built in your garden, that happened to me. I had a chicken coop in the back that my father built for me, and then we dismantled it. And walking in the garden barefoot one day as part of my grounding and earthing, I thought to take a stroll in the garden in that area, not realizing that there was still wood on the floor. And in that wood was a nail that went right into my foot. So when that kind of thing happens, folks, if you do stand on anything, particularly things that are rusty in the garden, please get yourself to a doctor because you probably need a tetanus shot to prevent any kind of disease or illness. So the other thing that is things that we don't look out for. We go out into the garden and we get so distracted and we're so busy with things, is falling branches. As we sit here, there is a branch dangling off one of my trees. And I looked at that as I drove out this morning. I thought, I need to pull you down. But I'm a little short, so if I pull you down, you're probably going to fall on my head. So I'll have to get my son to see to that. But yeah, keep your wits about you. Look around you, look up, look down. And when you spoke about that metal rake, I had visions of cartoons for the kiddies, any kiddie that might be listening. If you've seen the cartoons where Goofy will 10 to 1 always stand on a rake and the handle will whack him in the head. So watch out when you're out in the garden. It's a beautiful place to be, but yes, it can also be dangerous. Now, speaking of dangerous, it's very dangerous to avoid ad breaks. So let's go to an ad break and we'll be right back after this. Don't go away. And remember, you can WhatsApp your questions on 0609041056. We'll see you right after the break.
Something's happening this October. Urban Woman with me, Rabia, is turning 4 and we're celebrating in style. Ladies, it's time to dress up, show up and join us for a live show, a delicious lunch and of course, cake. Stand a chance to win an air fryer and enjoy plenty of exciting prizes and surprises. Block your calendar, Thursday, 31st October, 10 a.m. to 12 at the Alansar Conference Center. Tickets are 100 Rand available from the Alansar shop. Hurry, only 50 seats available. Book your spot and soak up some positive vibes.
Come get our butcher's best for less at Checkers Foods Cowie Park. Enjoy certified halal butchery products like Chabot Wurst Thick, $79.99 per kg. Extra lean beef mince, just $109.99 per kilo. Steakhouse Classic Beef Porterhouse Steak, just 13 Rand per 100 grams and 39 Rand per 300 grams. Deals valid from Monday, October 7th until Sunday, October 20th. Only at Checkers Foods Cowie Park, now certified by the NIHT, the National Independent Halal Trust, across our butchery, bakery and deli.
Hungry for flavour? Head over to Nando's Pavilion, Westville Mall or Oceans Mall, where our flame-grilled peri-peri chicken is always fresh and flavourful. Experience our hospitality by dining in at Nando's Pavilion, Westville Mall or Oceans Mall, which are all NIHT certified, and stand a chance to win a holiday getaway for four, valued at 10,000 Rand at the Umhlanga Sands. Nando's! Fire it up!
As promised at last year's Durban Summer Cirque, part of our profits will go to making a real difference in our community. The Al Ansar Foundation proudly completed its first borehole for the community of Redcliffe. With water shortages affecting many, our mission is clear. Let's bring clean water to more areas in need. Join us in making an impact. Call Outreach on 031 208 1601 or visit alansar.org.za to help build more boreholes and transform lives.
Radio Al Ansar, 24/7, 365.
And we're back. You are listening to Green Thumbs Up on Radio Al Ansar. And this morning we've been talking about gardening dangers. I just kind of in the ad break, went over to this question from Brother Abdul, and he was asking about grafting. And I must apologize, I didn't read that question properly, because he's talking about how to actually graft azaleas. So now azaleas, in talking about grafting, I'm assuming you mean how to propagate them, how to make more of them. So you can take soft cuttings of azaleas, and that would be to look at the azalea bush. We will still do a show on grafting, but I want to go back to this question to help you for now. So look for the greener stems, especially now this time of the year. Your azalea is, shooting out these beautiful new stems. Take that last, say, 5 centimeters to 7 centimeters of the stem, the soft green part. When you snip it at the base, try to snip it at an angle, and then take that little stem. If you have some rooting hormone powder, that'll work great. If you don't, you can make a mix of honey and cinnamon together. Mix those two together, and that makes a great rooting hormone as well as a protector from fungus. So dip the base, so where you've cut, dip that into the honey and cinnamon, and then put it into some soil. Snip away the leaves along that stem so that you only have the top leaves on there, and then make sure that you keep it away from extreme heat. Keep it damp, obviously, so that it can root, and that is how you would root or propagate azaleas. Obviously, you could also have seeds. You could grow it from seeds. And if you're wanting to graft in the sense of having more than one color in the same bush, that is also not difficult to do, but it is an entire topic that we are going to cover in another show. We're going to switch topics just slightly. We've still got Daryl Phipson on call with us, and he's joining us all the way from Australia. You can see us on YouTube, on Facebook. Come and join us there. WhatsApp your questions to 060 904 1056. We said we would talk about the composting, and then we would talk about the gardening dangers. See, I've gone and given it away now. Or we can talk about gardening, composting. So let's talk about gardening. Daryl, you see we are betwixt and betwanged this morning. So tell us a little bit about composting. A lot of the gardeners at home may have small gardens. Some may have really big gardens. Now, you have a massive property where you are growing all sorts of things. And I know that the first time we had you on the show, you were kind of re-looking at how to do your garden. So how is the compost heap going? What are you doing with composting? How do we go about it if we have the space?
Thank you, Rabia. I found that, or On the topic of composting, I found that initially when I started gardening, I was left with a lot of clippings and cuttings, etc., that obviously were from the plants, and I didn't know what to do with them, and I didn't want to take them to the tip. So that is basically how I got into composting. And I found that basically, since I have started composting, I'll never now be without a compost heap, because it's something that you can always keep on adding to. And once the nutrients break down, it can be very, very beneficial for your plants in your garden.
But there's a technique to it.
Yes, when I first started,
Yeah.
and so I was throwing in like branches and big logs, etc., and obviously those don't break down. So basically, with composting, what you really want to do is you want to get an even mix, and you need to get a material balance. So it's things like vegetable scraps and grass. So those are basically the greens that you want to put in. Now, when I basically put those in my composter, I normally don't put citrus in, so things like lemon, lime, etc. And that's because
onion skins I also avoid. Onion skins and potato skins, they also kind of create mold. Sorry to interrupt you. I tend to avoid potatoes, especially in onions.
Yes. And what you also need to do is you need to basically have besides the nitrogen aspect of it, you also need the carbon aspect. And so you basically want rich browns, and those basically old dead leaves, cardboard, newspaper, items of such. And, if you just tear them up or put them in the compost heap, and then I suppose the most important thing to do is aeration. Because if you just sit there and you leave the heap, what will happen over time is that the oxygen doesn't get underneath anymore. It all gets used up, and so the biodegrading process stops working.
You're talking about moving things and aerating things, and we've just had a message from one of our listeners that says, Assalamu alaikum, Sister Rabia, always a pleasure listening to you. I use a fork to loosen the soil in my garden, especially when we're expecting rain. Ground soaks the water best. But we're talking about aerating. And when you're moving the soil to soak in the rain, that's exactly what you're doing. You're adding space where the water can go in. So aerating our compost heap is important because we want the air to get in, because in order for things to decompose, they do need air to get in there. Now, how often do you turn your compost? Do you turn your compost, or do you just dig at the top layer? How would you go about it?
I like to turn my compost totally, probably about maybe every 2 weeks. And I find that, yes, and I think it loosens it up. It gets more air in there, and it basically helps with the breakdown of the microorganisms.
Okay, so yeah.
I was going to say, I was speaking about water earlier. Water is also a very important aspect when it comes to composting. You want your compost to be damp, almost soggy, but you don't want it to be saturated with water, because if you have too much water, then again, there is going to be not enough air in there, and you're going to find that the breakdown doesn't occur.
And that is an important point. I think about gardening compost heaps, and how you've either got to get in there and you've got to turn it around, but then people get very creative and they actually build a section. So instead of just having this pile of compost, they'll build a section or use a bin. If you have a smaller garden and you're using a bin, for instance, to compost in, be sure that there are holes. Think of them as windows all the way up the sides of your bin, or all the way up the sides of your compost section of your garden. So you could build it up, say, with bricks or with wood, which is also going to decompose. But every now and there, you need to allow gaps, and those gaps will help the air to flow through it. So just a question from Hafiza Shami, a listener, has said, salams, I have a Margaret Roberts lavender plant and it is not flowering. Now, I know that you're busy with lavender plants as well. So tips for flowering, letting your lavender plant flower. Remember, from a nutrient perspective, lavenders and every other plant require certain nutrients in order to flower. Nitrogen is going to give them leaves. You've got to clip it back so that it remains strong. So clip that lavender right back. Get rid of any dead wood that is in the middle, any branches, any stems that are dying off. Then we've got the nitrogen, that's your N. Then your phosphorus. The phosphorus is the P in NPK. Make sure you've got some phosphorus in there as well. And then you need your K, which is, of course, your potassium. Now, your NPK, you could give a balanced NPK, something like BioOcean Hafiza, and that will help your lavender plant. But if you specifically want it to flower, then we're needing a micronutrient, which is magnesium. So magnesium that helps us to stop our legs from, getting restless legs in the night, actually helps plants to flower. So if you're wanting to get fruit, you're wanting to get flowers, you need that flower before the fruit, what you do is you add some Epsom salts. It's a quick and easy way to add magnesium to our plants as a micronutrient. So that will help, hopefully, for your lavender bush to flower. Make sure also that it's getting enough sun. If your lavender bush is kind of in the shade or you've got one indoors, it needs the sun in order to be able to produce you some lovely, lovely flowers. If it's been sitting for a long time, you've never given it compost, people tend to have these beautiful plants and expect them to just keep giving. But just like us human beings, we've got to feed ourselves. We've got to pour something into our cup in order to be able to give something out to others around us. So for that, we have our NPK. We did a show a while back, Daryl, on fertilizing and the basics. And I always find the easiest way to remember NPK is it's a step-by-step process. N is most important when you want leaves. So the flower cycle, the plant cycle. You want leaves, give it N. You then want it to start to throw some buds out, then you give it P. That's the phosphorus. And then you're wanting the potassium when you want it to go from your flower, make your flower grow and go into fruiting stage. So that's a little summary for you. Let's get back to composting. You talked a little bit to us about balancing the green and the brown materials, but there are some things that shouldn't go into the compost. What kind of things should we be avoiding?
Absolutely. So what you want to do is you want to steer clear of foods like meat, dairy, and oily foods, because what these do is they attract pests, and something that can be a problem. And I'm talking about vermin primarily, rats. When you get rats, then you get snakes.
Yeah.
Um,
So
those are the things that you want to ideally keep away from.
Yeah, they also provide a stink. They really stink things up. And people will often say, oh, Rabia, I want to do a compost heap, but isn't going to stink. Isn't that compost heap going to stink? Your compost heap should not be excessively stinky. If you are throwing things in there that are going to rot rather than, turn and decompose. There's a difference between, rotting is a part of the decomposition process. But when we talk about a rot that's set in, we're talking about food. Like you've taken out of your pot, you've got some leftover stew with oil that doesn't break down. And that just leads to the wrong kind of bacteria. That's going to attract flies. It's going to attract, as you said, Daryl, it's going to attract snakes and other nasties, and we don't want any of that in our compost heaps. Let's talk about a little bit about moisture. You said water. Now, if we overwater that compost heap or we use too much greens, then we get slime. So how do we know how much water to put in?
Well, basically the consistency should be like that of a wrung out sponge. It just needs to be damp. You don't want it soggy.
Okay, so if you have a compost bin at home and you are growing and you're having, building your compost in a bin, tip it out. If the water runs out, let it run out. Let it run away completely. And that water is very, very valuable. It reminds me, Daryl, many years ago, I grew some really, really large spinach leaves. This It was the Ford Hook Giant, I'll remember. And also it was the cabbage, the Shumulier cabbage. And I remember taking a picture where I still got at home where this one leaf was taller than mine. Now that's not difficult because I'm only 1.50 meters, but nonetheless, 1.50 meters is pretty big for the length of one spinach leaf or one cabbage leaf. And honestly, the secret to my success was something that I read when I was looking up how people grow giant vegetables. And that was compost tea. Because we talk about compost as in the actual dry matter, but you can turn that compost into a tea. Most important thing being to aerate it. Have you ever tried to make compost tea? It's essentially liquid fertilizer.
No, I haven't actually made compost tea before. And that's primarily because when I compost, I try to always put my compost heap on a slope. And that's basically so that I can get good drainage.
Okay. So that's exactly like tipping the bucket and the water flowing out. Now with compost tea, this is a really interesting technique that I learned is you'll take a bin or a big dustbin, and into that you're going to fill it up with water, and you're going to add things like eggshells, tea bags that you break open the tea bag, throw the contents in, and take that little paper and put that in your compost heap. And coffee, you can use bat guano as well. And then herbs. If you've got herbs in the garden that you really know are good for composting, like comfrey. Now, comfrey is one that you can throw into your compost heap. It's going to help to break down the compost heap, not adding too much heat, but you can put that into your water as well. So your liquid compost should look like a well-brewed tea. But the secret is you need to put a little pump in there to keep it aerated. Just as our guest was saying, to aerate the compost heap, we need to aerate compost tea as well. And I find that works well to just have a little pump in there, like a little fountain pump, or you need to go in there every day and just give it a good shake, give it a good whisk. The compost tea is great because you can also add things to it like your chicken poop. Chicken poop is absolute gold, but too much of it is going to be a problem for your liquid compost. You could put your chicken poop into your normal compost heap, Daryl. But let's talk a little bit about the heat that it generates and other heat that gets generated in the compost. If there is too much heat in compost, what then?
Well, look, generally what happens is your compost heap normally gets to between 55 to 70 degrees. But if there is too much heat, what it actually does apparently is it actually kills the microorganisms that are eating away and actually create the compost. So the compost heap basically will stop working.
Yeah, but so you end up with just dead matter.
End up just with dead matter that's kind of just sits there, and like you used the word earlier, Rabia, it just rots, and it does. So sorry.
So what are some of the things that's okay? Some of the things that might generate a lot of heat in the compost heap. I think we've lost the signal. Are you there? No. Okay, so some of the things that may generate a lot of heat whilst we wait for our guests to get back on is, of course, your excess of garden grass clippings. Now, people will cut their grass and they will take the entire batch and throw it onto the compost heap. That's fine up until a point, because grasses and leaves are very high in nitrogen, and that can increase the heat in our garden. Oh, Daryl, you're back. There you are. So let's talk a little bit about how do we lower the heat? How can we lower the heat? Do we just add some more of the brown stuff in? Do we throw some water in there? What do we do?
What I normally do to lower the heat is I actually take the compost and I tend to throw more fresh compost into it, or more fresh or brown stuff. So what that does basically is it takes the hot compost mixture and it dilutes it. And I found that also what it does is it reduces the time to process the compost. So when you make compost, you can basically make it a good compost tip. You can produce within 4 to 8 weeks. But over a long time, basically you're looking at 3 to 6 months. So by mixing in new parts of greens and browns into your compost, you'll find that if you mix and blend it in, it basically will break down a lot quicker.
So if you've moved house and you have got lots of cardboard boxes, you know what to do with them. Put them into your compost heap, mix them in, and you can also use them in wormeries. Now, how about worms in compost?
Now, worms are something that I really enjoy because of all the benefits that they can provide to your garden. Worms are great, and like I mentioned earlier, I always don't put citrus, things like oranges, especially lemon, limes, etc. I don't ever put that in the compost heap because it's something, they're very acidic and it actually chases worms away. So I want to encourage the worms, and I find generally with food scraps that will attract a lot of worms. And when they get into the compost heap, it just works so much better.
Yeah, you could actually introduce some of, earthworms. You go and buy, sell some earthworms and introduce them into your compost heap. Perhaps just put them into one of the areas. So lift a section of the compost heap, add some cardboard down so that they are safe. Throw in a little bit of potting soil just to make like a little nest for your wormy worms. Okay. And then put them in there. Yeah, keep them happy and let them then nosh away on stuff. We had a wonderful person on the show. I forget her name now. Was it Maggie? I think Patsy from the Worm Farm. She was on the show a little while ago, and she was telling us how there are things that not only are harmful for earthworms, but can actually cause them to melt and break down. And one of those things is pineapple. I didn't know that. So pineapple can actually melt down the worms. So now we know from you, Daryl, citrus as well. So we'll have to avoid some of the citrus if we want to keep the worms alive. Now, how do we monitor the temperature in our compost heap? Cooking thermometers? What do we do?
I have an infrared thermometer that I use, but you can use a thermometer, and if you just want to take it and put it into the heap, leave it for 5 minutes, and then check the temperature. Like I said, 55 to 70 degrees is your ideal temperature. If the temperature goes up, it can actually lead to harmful pathogens that can develop, and you can create what is called bad compost. So 55 degrees is your ideal range, and you can obtain that and keep that. If it drops below 55 degrees, it generally means that there's not enough aeration. So just keep turning the compost on a regular basis, keep it nice and moist, but don't keep it soggy, and you'll get good results.
That's it. It's, continuously adding materials. If you're always adding your materials to the compost heap and you're not turning the compost heap, then you're going to have a problem because you're just getting these layers and layers and layers of wet, soggy, new material, and it's just not mixing in with the rest of the compost. So compost that's too wet, compost that's too dry, both of them are not great. And so that takes us to positioning of the compost in your garden, putting your garden heap out there. Where do you do that? Do you want it in the sun? Do you want it in the shade, semi-shade? What do you do in your garden?
Ruth, the best place is to put it in full sun.
Rabia.
Apologies.
That's okay. Put it into full sun.
Yes.
Okay. So the full sun is going to help to keep it hot and dry.
Yes. And then obviously make sure that it's well watered. What I tend to do is very often what happens with people is they start composting and then they start becoming impatient. They want to use the compost. It's like a waiting game. And then what happens is the compost is ready and they use all the compost and then they've got to start again. So what I found quite a good trick is I basically, when I do my compost, I'm continually adding to one side and I'm continually taking away from the other side. So what you put in on the left, for example, you take out from the right. And that way you've always got compost, and it becomes a never-ending cycle.
That makes wonderful sense. I know that with garden trenches, that also eliminates that issue. Trench composting is something that I tried that worked very well. You dig a trench in the garden and your kitchen waste goes into that tiny little section at the front, and you just keep adding along the line rather than up. So in this method of composting, you would compost along that groove in the ground and just cover it up with cardboard or soil even as you go. So it breaks down within the soil and then you just plant on top of it. So it makes it much easier. So Daryl, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show with us this morning. It was great having you from Australia. And we look forward to hearing more about the exploits in your garden. I know you've been very busy creating secret gardens and orchids and orchards and all sorts of things. So we will touch base with you again sometime. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much, Rabia. It's been a pleasure being on the show again.
Thank you. So that's it from Daryl Phipson. We've been talking about composting and talking about dangers in the garden. There was one important thing that we didn't cover today, and that was nature's apothecary, apart from the mosquito question. And I want to cover something that ties in the composting with the nature's apothecary, and that is comfrey. I mentioned that you can add comfrey leaves into your compost heap, and that helps to break things down. So you do get what are called compost activators that you can pour into your compost heap, and that helps to break things down. Now, comfrey is a natural compost activator, and all you do is take your comfrey leaves and throw them in the garden. But comfrey has other benefits for us as human beings. It is a herb that you should have in your garden. It is also known, in old name is bone knit. Why? Because it actually helps to knit our bones together. It helps us to rebuild tooth enamel, and so you can get comfrey oil and comfrey tea. And here's a quick recipe because we're almost done. The time is running away on the show. First thing you can make is your comfrey tea that you can use as a mouth gargle. You can use in your compost heap, and you can use for aching bones, and that is just a teaspoon of the dry comfrey or a quarter cup of the fresh comfrey into a cup of boiling water. Let it stand, strain it, and there you go. You can have it cold or you can have it hot. It is known as the champagne of teas not because it's champagne and alcoholic, but because comfrey herb has a wonderful flavor, and it has wonderful properties for our body, helping us to rebuild bones, to reduce inflammation. And how then do we make a good comfrey ointment? If you're wanting to make an ointment for bones and joints and aching pains, it's dead easy. You want 1 cup of comfrey, you want a half a cup of coconut oil, and then you want a quarter cup of beeswax. Melt all of that melty in a pot, and then after it's been in that pot, slowly on low heat for about 15 minutes, you can take it out, strain it, pour it into jars, and hey presto, we have ourselves an ointment. Not forgetting, if you do have those aches and pains for arthritis, rheumatism, joint pains, you've sprained a muscle, comfrey is excellent for that. So a while ago, I've spoken to you about castor oil and how important castor oil is for aches and pains and joints and things. Well, there you go. You can take your castor oil and your comfrey, throw those two together, put them in a pan on the stove, a cup of the castor oil to a quarter cup of the comfrey, fresh comfrey leaves. Never let that heat rise above 50 degrees. If you want to give it an extra kick of painkiller, throw in a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Yes, so let it sit on the stovetop below 50 degrees centigrade for around about 20 minutes. Take it off the heat, strain it, and you have yourself the most marvelous oil for aches and pains. When you go to the gym, you come home and you're stiff and you're achy, there you go. And that's all we have time for today. It's been wonderful spending time with you once again today. Alhamdulillah. And we look forward to another Green Thumbs Up show with you. Jazakallah for spending this time with us. You can always rewatch it on Facebook or on YouTube. And from me, until next week, remember, today is a beautiful day to be happy. Jazakallah khair to Ashfat Fili, our sound engineer, to our guests, and from the entire team at Al Ansar, we say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Be fun, and there are so many colors in a flower. So let's paint everyone. And that little boy painted flowers in neat rows of green and red. And when the teacher asked him why, This is what he said.
Red, green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen.
But there must still be a way to have our children say, there are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flower, and I see everyone. There are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors.
Radio Al Ansar, 24/7, 365.
An informative Islamic global perspective. This is Al